these presentations today, please type them into the questions tab on the GoToWebinar menu and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Laurie. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 28th edition of CropTalk. This week we got a few different things happening. We're going to bounce around a little bit. We're going to talk about what's happening in the field, and there's a lot of different things going on. So I thought it would be a good time to maybe just go around and see what's happening. We got producers out there that are seeding already. Some are seeding in full strength already, going like crazy, and then there's some that are just getting ready to get going and doing some work that didn't get done last fall. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and then we're going to go into our crop scouting panel where we've got some questions that have come in over the last week and try to get those answered for everyone. So I mentioned that some producers are out in the field, and we started our weekly crop reports this week, and right now, as of I guess April the 27th, I think we're right around the 2% seeding complete, which is basically right around the average for this time of year. Looked like we were going to get off to an early start, but some snow and cool conditions have definitely slowed some areas down. We've got some areas that, like I mentioned, that soil may be a little bit lighter and maybe didn't receive as much of the snowfall, that we're able to get a little bit started a little bit earlier here on the second go round. But I think talking to producers, I think they're just not quite ready in some areas to get going. Some of the edges of the fields are still fairly wet, and some producers are thinking if you wait a few more days, we'll be able to get all those and not have to come back and do some touch-up seeding later on. When you look about where we should be in seeding and getting our maximum yields, the last week of April right through to probably the second week of May gives us probably the optimum time periods for seeding our cereal crops anyways, and I think that's what most producers are going to start on. We've got some producers looking at peas, are putting peas in already as well, but just a chart to show where we are and where we should be looking towards. Third week of May, it's starting to drop off a little bit, but the first 2 weeks of May, we're still looking at anywhere between 90 and 100% of our long-term average yields. One of the things when you get talking about cereals, you get talking about seed treatments, and one of the things I was wanting to talk about today, and we were lucky to have Todd Drummond on today, and he's going to talk a little bit about seed treatments and why should I seed treat, and I guess it's a good opportunity right now when guys are just getting a lot of the cereals in the field to go over this topic and get a little bit of an update. So right now, Laurie, if we can hand the screen over to Todd, I think we'll go into should I treat my seed.
All right, thanks, Lionel. If somebody can just give me a heads up when you can see my my PDF file.
We can see your screen now.
Okay, excellent. All right. Thanks again, Lionel. Appreciate the time just to give growers and retailers alike a little heads up just on why we should treat our seed. I'm not here to actually sit back and start talking about products. I think just really as an agronomic feature, it's first and foremost, and we've been getting some calls in the last little while about why I should treat my seed, or should I continue. The big thing is I'll focus a little bit or mostly on cereals at this point in time. I think peas that are going in the ground, I'll make just a quick mention that most of those growers that are treating for peas, inherently it's going to be for seed and soil-borne disease. Ideally, that's what you're treating for. But the other aspect about treating pea seed is a lot of growers do like some liquid on that seed, soften the seed, and protect it from cracks. Seed treatment is a really good way of getting that on as well, and then just helping you with a really good plant establishment, which therefore creates a good root structure as well, which a greater root structure allows for better nodulation, and on down the line. So better nodulation eventually is going to reward you in more yield. So what I'm going to do is this is a document that I sent out to retailers here just the other day, and Lionel was copied in on it as well. So thanks for the invite again. I'm going to focus in on some different quadrants, so bear with me as I just loom in here so that we can look at this just in a little closer detail. So really at the end of the day, when growers are still trying to decide whether they should be treating or not, really what I want to do is identify the risk. And the risk really comes from a seed treatment protecting from seed and soil-borne diseases. So the first thing when I think about seed, I want to start with a really good seed source, or seed that may be certified seed or maybe carryover seed. And quite frankly, if we think about the year that we come out of in carryover seed, and I'll go right back, as you can see, 2017 was when this document was originally produced, but we come out of 2016, we went into 2017, and 17 we had all this seed there, and 16 was a different story just because we had a high fusarium load, etc. But 17 was some uncharted waters from the past history of being wet. But if you think about it, 17 was fairly dry, 18 was dry, 19 was dry, 20, 19 was wet late, but as far as the source and developing your seed, we actually had some really good conditions. It was just harvest was terrible. And then 20, quite frankly, we were a little bit wetter in areas, drier in areas. So the real question is, well, here's my seed source. What have I got? Should I treat it? Start with good seed, and you'll have a pretty good idea based on, you can do a fungal scan, you can get a germ test, etc., and really look at, okay, here's what I'm starting with, what should I do? But that's only one aspect of why a guy should treat. We're also treating for soil-borne diseases. So the seed you can control, your source you can control, but the soil, it's out of your control. You're putting that seed in, and now you're hoping for its best. So looking at soil-borne diseases, you really want to pick a seed treatment with both contact and systemic activity. The contact activity cleans the seed, so it cleans the outer barrier of the seed, that any of the fungal pathogens that could be on there. And then systemic activity, really what happens is that seed treatment that's on the outer coating of the seed, when the seed brings in the moisture, so imbibes the moisture into the seed, that it swells up, and then when the shoot starts to grow, that seed treatment is uptaken or imbibed with that into the shoot, and then pushed out into that new seedling. So remember, seed treatments protect from seedling diseases. Seed treatments eventually, that dilution factor within that plant, it's not going to, carry you out into that 5-6 week range. Really what we talk about is that 2-3 week period when the seedling is the most vulnerable to all those soil-borne pathogens. That's why we're treating. So the other thing we think about soil-borne diseases and some of the disease that are in there is that I always look at seeding depth as a factor in a soil-borne disease, because the deeper you go from the seed, or when planting that seed from the seed to where the shoot emerges through the soil, that piece of shoot below the surface, the deeper it is, it has more surface area for those diseases to infect that stem or that new shoot that's coming through. So really what we want you to be careful of is don't plant too deep. We don't want to bury it. We don't want to have more surface area, with the ability to be infected from disease. And then of course we need, the disease triangle in order for diseases to be a factor. So we need the environment. So the environment, quite frankly, can be, the soil source you have, the pathogen. Well, the pathogens, of the major disease that we're looking at for cereals, let's say, is fusarium, C. sativus or root rot, as well as pythium, and then the host. I mean, that's the crop. So we have that, right? We have moist soils right now, depending on when you're getting seeding and whether you've had to put some fertilizer on, whether it's a 1-pass or 2-pass system, those environment things are going to change. But quite frankly, we have the pathogen host. Overall, the environment is there, and we can create the peas. So the next is really, the way I look at it is the why. Why are we doing this? So I look at you get one chance to put the seed in the ground, or you get one great chance to put the seed in the ground. We can always do reseeding, but nobody likes to do that. And when we do that, and we do it in the best possible way, you've still got that 100% potential impact behind that seed. So from here on in, what we really want growers to be able to do is say, now, once we have that seed in, what is left? What can we do? So the way I look at it is protecting your investment. So you're putting a seed treatment on to protect your investment of the cost of the seed. Letting that seed, develop into its full potential. Next is fertilizer cost, protecting that investment, which means, you've got your front loaded, one pass seeding. Very few guys are actually, dribble banding or feeding that crop throughout the year. We're all front loaded. So let's protect the fertilizer costs. Let's make sure that the seed and the plant is the best plant we can be to be able to utilize that fertilizer and the fertilizer costs that you've already front loaded in. Then we have herbicide costs. So eventually you're going to be spraying some weeds. And I look at it as crop emergence. So the more even the crop without any gaps, etc., what that crop is doing, it's helping you with crop competition. And then on top of that, the next step in growing a crop is looking at fungicide costs. And really, we want even emergence, which therefore lends to even head emergence for better fungicide timing. And then the last step is on crop maturity. So the more even the crop is, the more even it is to decide potentially when we need to do a pre-harvest application if we need be, or just allows to get in and harvest that field more efficiently rather than going through some different areas of crop green that maybe got off to a slower start versus an earlier start, etc. But really, at the end of the day, what we want to do is we want to start that crop off with a really good fighting chance to protect all the other investments that you've got within that. So then the dry soil. Really, the old rule of thumb was the soil is cold, the soil is wet, I'm going to treat. As soon as the soil warms up and it starts to dry out, I'm not going to treat. Well, what we do know, and this is an old document that has been moved back and forth with a lot of different companies, and I mean it's true, and we see that the spectrum of diseases change as we move on. So really, when we think about it, I boil down to cereals. As I mentioned, Fusarium, C. sativus, and Pythium. Those are the three major diseases in Western Canada that is going to rob your crop from its full maximum potential of yield. So when we look at this, I mean, ideally, we know that we've got wet soils, and cold is really when we would traditionally treat. So traditionally, you were actually treating for Pythium, ideally. Rhizoc, in Western Canada, Rhizoc in cereal is not an issue. It can be in pulses and canola, but in cereals not. So really what growers are saying is, well, I'm over here, I'm in maybe moist to dry conditions, and while it's warming up. So what we do know is wet, cold, warm is Pythium. When we look at warm, dry, and moist, we're looking more at this C. sativus. So that's just your regular root rots, okay? And then when we look at the Fusarium species, well, we can see Fusarium species prevalent in cool soils that are moist, but as well in moist, dry, and warm soils is where the Fusarium is. And Fusarium, quite frankly, is very prevalent. We know that's the #1 most disease-robbing pathogen out there, and we want to make sure that we're warding that off within the soil again, because you can protect the seed that you've got. But at the end of the day, we want to make sure that you're very clear on your overall protection. In peas, really, you're looking at, as I mentioned, Rhizoc, Aphanomyces, and Ascochyta. And really, Rhizoc in peas is cold, dry, moist soils. And quite frankly, with peas, when you're inoculating your plant and no need for a banded fertilizer, or you can truly go zero till. Obviously, there's a lot of trash. The trash basically blankets that ground from warming up. So you're really in that zero till, no disturbance area. You're really rolling into that cool condition type atmosphere that's giving you that that overall cool soil where rhizoc is prevalent. So the other thing is, I just wanted to show you here as well. We talk about, you know, the diseases that are affecting all crops, and because we know that Fusarium, C. sativus, and Pythium are the major ones in, say, cereals, namely wheat and barley, but we can see Fusarium is also a factor in beans. It's a factor in peas. We know that C. sativus, you know, is a major factor in mainly the cereals. Looking at peas, we got Pythium and rhizoc, etc. So really, the spider graph shows that a lot of the diseases that we are actually trying to control are very prevalent in all crops. Manitoba Pulse Growers Association actually launched some information. It was a while back, I suppose, and they actually noted that Fusarium was the #1 disease that was infecting both peas and soybeans. So I think it's something that would need to be on the radar, and remember, Fusarium in cereals is that warm, dry, moist soil. So the other thing, and lastly to this, is actually you know, out of sight, not out of the woods. You know, if you're running into a field after planting and you see that you got some poor plant stands, don't just think out you know, in the overall atmosphere. What I want you to do is actually look starting below the soil. That's where you started. You put the seed below that. So let's ground truth it, find out what's happening, get your little spade out. So what I want you to do when you're looking below, I want you to look for diseased roots, diseased shoots that are coming up, as far as looking at, you know, any browning or any disease looked like areas for you know, trying to establish what's going on. The other thing what I want you to look for is actually insects. So yesterday I had the privilege of actually being on the farm setting the drill, and while we were checking depth, I was digging wireworms. So you know, you can't treat wireworms after the fact. So in thinking about that, and you're, you know, moving around and maybe checking to see how much moisture is there and so on and so forth, maybe think about a wireworm seed treatment as well. So they are prevalent. And then the other one, of course, is if I have a poor plant stand, again, how deep was it? You know, did I bury it? You know, is there any other issues that come from that? So, you know, that's the why on treating. So really identifying the risk, protecting your investment in seed, ruling out, you know, what are the diseases that are going to affect my plant from a really good stand establishment. Know your diseases that are out there and affecting the crops that you're growing, and then after all said and done, you know, go out and do some prevalence scouting. So with that, Lionel, I think that's kind of all I had to share.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I got a question here for you. Is there any concerns for how long will the seed treatment will stay on the seed? So I guess what they're getting at is, if I treat the seed and for some reason I'm not being able to seed it for a while, is there any concerns of, or what's the shelf life, I guess, of seed treatment?
Yeah, great question. So you know, that was the old adage, the old VitaFlows of the world, solvent-based and very hard on germination, especially on shelf life. Everything is all water-based formulations now. So, and you know, ours are fine. I think I could probably blanket the statement with a lot of the other seed companies out there. Here's a prime example. 2011, we've tried to forget it, but we often remember the factors that go into 2011 when we treat seed, and then it sat in a bin. We actually did a germ test of a grower. It was Raxil on barley at the time. Regermed it in 2012, and everything was fine. So the new seed treatments don't affect germination, so the shelf life is at least 1 year old, and I could probably go out and say it's probably, you know, more than that. But the new seed treatments are a lot safer than what the old solvent-based treatments that we used to have.
Okay, and I guess just a follow-up to that one is the equipment used for treating. How critical is it to you know, go from, you know, dribbling it into the auger as going up to the air seeder, or do I need to get it done, you know, at a seed, somebody with a, you know, an expensive seed treatment equipment?
So you get what you pay for. It's a terrible saying, but it really resonates on seed treatment. Seed treatments are a low cost investment. You know, $4 an acre. So really, what you want to do is a 2-to-1 investment. You want to get $8 in return, right? You want to get your money plus you want to double it. Well, call that a bushel of wheat. So you're never ever going to see it, but we want to be able to measure it if we can. And the best way of doing it is getting everything off to a good start. So the really mixing part of putting a seed treatment on is the auger that it's flowing through. So you don't want it enormously full. You want it to stay in the auger as long as you can. So a really worn out auger really has a purpose. Don't get rid of it, you know, save it for seed treating. But the longer it stays in that tube and goes through, that's your mixing part. That's your mixing chamber, okay? Now, as far as a dripper, it can get the product on and hopefully you can maximize it, but a dripper flows really quick when the jug is full or when the container's full, but when it actually starts to empty, of course, the gravity pressure lessens. Then you have to be managing the valve to make sure you're getting the same flow rate. So having a dripper, I would say, is you can get the product there and you can get it into the auger, but the challenge is having flow rates. You need seed treatment evenly distributed. I don't want to see really red seeds and then some seeds without. So there's a lot of economical seed treating equipment. Number one, commercial seed treaters have the best equipment, and a lot of those guys will use what you can access as well. So a G3, and there's other new Rockport Colony treaters, UCAN 2 treaters, anything that is based with a 12-volt pump or a 110-volt pump that can maintain the pressure within, so it doesn't affect by gravity. You know, you're using that current to push it through. As long as you know your flow rate out of your bin, which is constant, you don't move that. You match that with a calibration setting on liquid, and then it's good. So just make sure that it's the mixing tube that is in there as long as you can, and really that's what's doing your secondary treating.
Okay, great. Thanks, Todd. Thanks for coming on today. Real good information on seed treating, and I think just a heads up for guys to make sure they don't skip that step.
Thanks.
Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about is last week we talked a bit about fall rye and winter wheat, and we had Ann Kirk answer one of the questions on the webinar regarding its emergence this spring. I was out last couple of days looking at some fall rye fields and some winter wheat fields. Here's a picture of the fall rye field, and you can see the new growth that Ann talked about. The new shoots, our new roots coming out of the crown. This fall rye field looking actually pretty decent. Coming up and start seeing rows pretty regular in that field. They looks like they made it through the winter good. Winter wheat in general is good. However, I was seeing some areas, mainly hilltops, that were showing some winter kill. And when we look at the our soil temperatures, and I took these off our website, and I was wondering why the winter wheat seemed to be a little bit behind the fall rye. And when I got looking at some of the soil temperatures, when you look at Melita, we're looking at anywhere from 5 to 9 degrees Celsius, and this would be at 1 inch deep. So basically where that where it's the crown is, you look at Arborg, a little bit cooler. Looked at sorry, I skipped a slide there, but Carberry was at 4 to 6, and then Roblin at 5 to 10, actually a little bit warmer in the Roblin area. So soil temperatures at that inch are anywhere between 5 and 10 degrees Celsius. So we should be getting growth. When I went out to the winter wheat fields, I was seeing some growth from the crown. You could see the roots starting to grow. But I did a little bit of checking, and I think fall rye just can get going a little bit quicker. It doesn't require as much warmth in the soil to start going earlier in the spring, and I think winter wheat needs just to be a little bit warmer. So probably one of the reasons why we're seeing the fall rye crops maybe advancing a little bit faster than the winter wheat crops. And there's a picture of the fall rye crop coming, and I mentioned you could definitely see rows coming in it right now. Okay, we're gonna hit into the crop scouting panel, and we've got a few questions that have come in, and again, an assortment of questions. So we're gonna start off with seeing some saline areas that appear larger this spring, and some producers are starting to phone in and say, well, how come this saline area is a little bit bigger than last year, or twice as big as last year? And I thought maybe we could get John and Marla to maybe make a few comments regarding that.
Yeah, Marla here. So definitely when we're talking about seeing some of these saline areas, they are going to look bigger this spring because as we go into these drier phases, more of that upward movement of water is happening. And so again, where we see salinity coming up, it's because we have a higher rate of evaporation or upward movement of water compared to the downward movement of water from precipitation. So when it's dry, those salts are coming up more than they're going down. So we do see these saline areas kind of expand in these dry years. The biggest thing that we can do right now is, I mean, hope for some moisture for other reasons as well, but really to be able to help dissolve those salts and move them back down. If people are thinking about different ways to try to decrease these saline areas, the problem is there's not a ton that we can do in a quick format, or try to kind of fix it in this year. If you want to get something really salt tolerant growing in those areas, this year might not be the best year to try to do that because the salts will be so concentrated and so high. You actually want to be trying to target your saline areas in the wetter years when the salinity is a little lower, because you know it's always going to come back and haunt you in these dry years.
So one of the questions I've been getting is like, why is it so much whiter? It just seems like there's so much white in some of those areas. Is that just
that is actually just the salt coming up to the surface. So when the water comes up in those small pores, that capillary rise that draws water up from below, and then the water evaporates, the salt that came with it is left crystallized on the surface. So we see more and more of that white essentially because of it's the salt crystals that are coming up with that water that are being left behind when the water dissolves.
Yeah, it's John here too. The other thing is we just haven't had moisture this spring. If we get some spring rains or things like that, it flushes a few of those salts, maybe an inch or so below, so you don't see it. Still there, exactly. You just don't see it. But we haven't had spring moisture to do that.
No, exactly.
So should I be looking at seeding anything different in those areas? Like I'm gonna still sow a cereal crop, let's say. If that field was going to go into wheat, should I still leave out that whole area into wheat, or should I look at something different in those areas that maybe can withstand more?
Well, wheat is going to be one of your more tolerant cereal crops. Barley too. So if you're looking at putting cereals in, they have a little bit more tolerance. In terms of what's happening, like just at that surface versus whether those salts, like John said, if you get some moisture, some of those salts dissolve and go down a little bit, they're still going to be there. But again, like I said, you could take that area and say, okay, I'm going to finally start to sow down something like a salt mass, like a saline master, saltlander, or some kind of, like, I really want to target this into a saline tolerant forage. But again, that is a good management of these areas. If they are typically saline, it might be harder to get things growing in the years right now when it's really dry, because it's harder. If it is going to stay dry, it's going to be harder to get that forage growing in the first place this year. Plus it's higher salt concentration currently, so you might want to think about, doing this in the future. But I mean, your cereals are going to be the most tolerant thing generally to that salt level. if you really wanted to know how bad it is, you could test it. But really, as again, like John said, when we get a little bit of moisture, some of those salts will dissolve and move down a little bit. But essentially, they've always kind of been there. It's just they're rearing their ugly head right now just because it's been so dry.
Yeah, Marla, I'd just add that you use this salt appearance to your advantage, and don't waste your time planting any corn or soybeans in those areas. Those areas that those crops are just not going to do well. So it's rare that you have your variable rate seeding map show up in the spring. This is telling you where to turn your seed rate down to 0 for wheat or for soybeans and corn.
Absolutely. When I joke about how, you could get an EM38 map to figure out where your saline areas are, or you could plant soybeans and just see where they all die out or turn yellow. In this case, you don't have to waste the dollars in seeding the soybeans either in order to create your salinity map. You know where your salts are right now. So use that knowledge to your advantage and take note of it right now and see how bad it is. And we can call me later as we can start trying to figure out how to make some changes into the future if you're interested in trying to figure out how to keep these salts from getting so bad in other dry years.
The picture there on the screen I took when I was at producer's place, and he said that like last year that area was like 45 bushel canola, and so like nothing really wrong with it, and all of a sudden this year it shows up. That is that saline layer, because you mentioned that the water leaves the salt behind. How thick would that layer be? Like, again, it's probably going to depend on how bad the salinity is, but thinking last year was a good crop, that saline layer is just like right at the soil surface then now, or
it's everywhere.
It's Go ahead.
It's really everywhere. It's those salts are kind of it's in throughout that soil profile, and they're just kind of moving up and down and concentrating in some areas and moving down into other areas, and it changes and varies from year to year. It's the same reason why if you were going to test for salts in one year and say this is my salt level, well, it changes from year to year a little bit, again based on where the water is moving them to. So there, in these areas, there's salt throughout that profile. It's just where it's being concentrated. And in this case, it's kind of all coming a bit more to the surface. The fact that canola did okay in there also shows that, in general, these salt concentrations are high, especially, again, like John said, don't be trying to target soybeans and corn in this field. But wheat and canola are more of your tolerant crops. And so the canola was able to tolerate those salt levels. This salt was in the rest of the profile last year. It's just right now it's showing up closer to the surface because all of that water has been moving up. So, keep your wheat cereal, like your higher tolerant cereals, your canola in that rotation. Cut the tillage, and that means like shallow surface tillage too. It decreases the amount of upward movement of water. You really want to decrease any evaporation potential. That's pulling more of those salts up to the surface and just going to make it worse, especially in these dry years.
Okay, thanks guys. Next question be for Kim and Dennis Slang. Surface supplied herbicide in min-till situations this spring. The question was on peas that I got. Looking at putting it on with a Harrow bar with Valmar on it. How should I do it and how does it work?
Sorry, Lionel, that was on Edge, you said?
Yeah, Edge on the peas,
okay,
but also I'm assuming the same kind of answer would be for Avidex or this spring or whatever. But yeah, this question was for Edge on peas.
For Edge. Okay, yeah. Okay, so yeah, we've this is the time of year that guys are, this is make or break time for those products. There's a couple of different things. If you're using the micro granule products, like the dry products, you need to get those on ahead of time because they have a 10-day period in there that in order for that micro granule to activate. So they need to be incorporated, and there's a time in there before they're before they become active and before they start working. Avidex and Edge and Treflan are a little bit different. Avidex works on the soil. It works on wild oats only, and it works as the wild oats grow through the layer, so they can come from below the layer, and as long as they're coming through that layer, it works. You know, they pick up the chemical, and they can, you know, they get killed by it. The Treflan and the Edge, though, are a little different. The weed seeds needs to germinate in that layer, so it's really important for those to get the incorporation done properly, and you need to have 2 incorporations. The first one needs to be to a depth of about 3 to 4 inches. And then you need to wait, and that should be done as quickly as possible, especially with Edge. That needs to get in. These chemicals are very, they're not very stable. They don't have a lot, they gas off quickly, I guess, so they need to get incorporated into the soil so that they can start to activate. And so you need to get them incorporated quickly. And again, with Edge, within 24 hours would be great. And sometimes too, if you can do it while you're applying, that's great. That's even better. And then normally you wait about 3 days at least, and then you want to do a second incorporation a little bit shallower. You can do that with heavy harrows if you want. And the first incorporation is to get the chemical, the product into the soil, and the second incorporation is to get it even, because it's really important for Treflan and Edge to have that really nice even layer, so those weed seeds germinate in that layer. So the incorporation is really crucial, and it looks different on every farm. You probably should be using the most aggressive tillage tool you've used on that field in recent years, because that's where the weed seeds are. So in a min or a zero till situation, you can actually get away with just 1 incorporation with a heavy harrow, as long as you get the product down into the soil and past the trash layer and stuff. But because that's in a min and zero till situation, that's where your weed seeds are. They're all right at the surface, or very, very close to the surface. But with any type of other tillage, you should be incorporating both of those products, the Edge and the Treflan, into a little bit deeper in the soil to get that nice layer where those weed seeds are going to pick up the chemical.
How important, I guess the question the producer was really asking me was the time he has to wait before he could go see, because truthfully he was sitting on the edge of the field with the air seeder as he was putting the product on. So what would happen if he did go and seed that and didn't get, I guess, proper time to gas off?
Yeah, that, I guess, I mean, I hate to say it depends, but it probably does depend. It'll depend on soil type and how well, you know, I guess that first I'm assuming the first incorporation got in. The first incorporation gets the chemical in, and then it's like, again, it's that time to get it to gas off and to get it distributed. I guess the concern is that it's not evenly distributed in the soil. So I would expect to maybe see some misses or some stripping if you don't have that time period in there, and you don't get that second incorporation to get it nice and evenly distributed. You're probably going to see some areas that just didn't get enough activation. So you may see some areas where the weed control isn't as good as it would have been if we had it a nice even layer across the whole field. So that is the concern with doing that. You know, having said that, it's going to depend like on soil type and on tillage implements. Some tillage implements are quite aggressive, and there's a fair bit of soil thrown around. Others, if you have just like a 1-inch opener on 10-inch spacing, you're not moving hardly any dirt at all. So really, you're not going to get much more mixing. Ideally, we really want these products mixed nicely in the soil. They need to be mixed well. That first incorporation, again, gets it in the soil with any type of soil moisture, because we're mixing it fairly deep as well. There is there is soil moisture down in that 3 to 4 inch depth. Maybe the top bit's a little dry, but we do want to get that mixed in. So at least that first incorporation gets it mixed into the soil, but it's the second incorporation that's kind of the finesse move that really gets it even. So it's still going to work. I would say it's your chances are that it won't work nearly as well as if you'd waited that time period for it to gas off and then get it evenly distributed.
Okay, thanks, Kim. I think Dennis is on. Dennis, did you have any comments or?
No, I think you know, Kim has hit the nail on the head on all those comments. So I have nothing further to add on that one. So
yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, I guess I could just say too, like there is liquid formulations of the edge. Like there's a commercial for commercial applicators. There's a liquid edge. There isn't a liquid edge available to farmers, but there is a liquid Treflan and there is a liquid Avedex. So those work really well, and they are available, or they work a little bit more quickly. There isn't the 10-day lag in weed control on those, but having said that, they can only go on certain fields. There has to be less than 30% residue on them, so your fields have to be fairly black. There can't be a lot of clods and stuff. The field has to be fairly nice and mellow, but that is another option for guys as well, and I've seen those work really well in the spring, but again, that's not suitable for every field. So if that works, then that might be a better option if somebody wants to get going very quickly.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Next question is going to go to Tim Clark. Tim Clark is one of our livestock specialists. His contact information is there below, but been starting to get some questions on how should I manage my pasture this spring, especially under the dry conditions. Is there something I should be looking for, whether it be staging of the grass? And then the big question is, with fertilizer prices going higher, what should be my fertilizer strategy for my hay fields? So I think I got this question in a couple days ago, so I gave Tim a heads up, and I think he put a couple slides together. So Lori, if you could hand the screen over to Tim.
Can you hear me?
You bet, Tim.
Okay. Okay, so in talking about when's the best time to take your cattle to pasture, I just wanted to do a little bit of background on understanding how plants grow and why we should release our cattle on pastures when we do. So in early spring, prior to the 3-leaf stage, pasture grasses use up carbohydrates stored in the roots in order to grow. And the plants build up stores of root carbohydrates in early fall and winter in order to initiate regrowth in the spring. By the 4-leaf stage, plants are producing carbohydrates in the leaves and stems via photosynthesis using water, nutrients, and sunlight. During the night, the plant respires and uses up the carbohydrates to produce more plant material. In other words, the plant will grow at night and it will photosynthesize during the day. So if we clip or graze the plant before the 4-leaf stage, we reduce the area of the solar collectors, the leaves and the stems, and so that will compromise the plant's ability to produce carbohydrates in order to grow. So if your pasture is mostly grasses, we recommend waiting until after the 3 to 4-leaf stage, or when the plants are at least 6 to 8 inches tall. If you have a high proportion of legumes in the pasture, we recommend not grazing until the plants are 8 to 12 inches tall. Native range is particularly sensitive to early grazing. If you graze before the 3rd leaf stage of native grasses, it can result in a yield loss of over 60% of the potential forage yield for the year. Generally, we say that grazing 1 week too early in the spring will sacrifice roughly 3 weeks of grazing in the fall. So this is a plant that has 3 fully developed leaves, and it has 2 leaves at the top which are not fully developed. The leaves are fully developed when they have a collar all the way around the leaf surface, all the way around the stem, pardon me. So plants need to rest and recover from grazing or cutting in order to stay healthy and grow. Every time a perennial plant is cut or grazed, some of the roots die. The more often the plant is defoliated, and the shorter it is defoliated too, the less roots the plant will have over time. Less roots means less water and nutrient uptake because of less root mass and therefore less yield. Hayfields are generally rested for most of the growing season and therefore are able to develop extensive root systems. Pastures which are rested periodically during the growing season are also able to develop extensive root systems and therefore yield higher than continuously grazed. So forage plants need at least 1 month of rest to regrow properly and replenish their nutrient levels. We suggest not overgrazing. Leave some plant material behind so the plants will continue to grow. We recommend about 2 to 6 inches of plant residue. The more leaf area remaining, the more photosynthetic material available to enable the plants to regrow and produce more yield later on in the growing season. So overgrazing is a function of time and duration of grazing. It usually occurs when the plant is grazed before it has had time to recover from the previous grazing. Many grass root systems will stop growing within 24 hours of severe defoliation or grazing, and in most cases they will not resume growth for at least 10 to 14 days afterwards. The more you rest, the more rest you give the overused pasture, the better. And in talking about nutrient removal amounts from your fields differ between hayfield versus pasture fields. This is because when we hay a field and feed the hay elsewhere on the farm, that removes 90% of the soil's nutrients that the plant takes up. And those nutrients are exported off the field unless you're feeding the hay there. Whereas when we graze, the plants, we only remove about 10% of the soil nutrients that the plant takes up because the livestock feces and urine are deposited back onto the field, and that represents about 90% of the soil nutrients that the plants remove in order to grow. So an effective forage program begins with a soil test and later proper fertilization according to target yields. And it's important when we send in a soil test that we put in our crop choices, such as alfalfa grass or pure alfalfa, and we put down there our target yields, and then the soil testing lab will send recommendations on what to put on in order to achieve those target yields. Legumes have the ability to take nitrogen from the air we breathe because the air is 76% nitrogen. Nitrogen is the nutrient plants require for growth in the largest quantities next to water. So more nitrogen increases plant yield, but also increases the protein in plants. Higher protein concentration in plants fed to animals results in more production of bone, muscle, and milk. So these are some legumes that fix nitrogen. Red clover we see in the top left. It's easy to establish and it grows very well, especially in wet areas. Top right is bird's foot trefoil. We see that the pods look like a bird's foot. That's where it gets its name from, and has bright yellow snapdragon-like flowers. This is a non-bloat legume, so we can establish it in our pastures in large quantities and it will not cause bloat. Sweet clover is easy to establish, and it's a biennial or short-lived perennial. It's important if you're grazing it to keep it in its vegetative stage, because once it goes into the flowering stage or reproductive stage, it becomes very coarse and the cattle will not preferentially graze it. Another non-bloat legume is called Seister Milk Veg, which I have in the bottom left there. It is very well suited to restoration as well as grazing in pastures if we introduce it into our pastures. And it is non-bloat as well. It is for higher areas that don't flood. So based on some research done at Ag Canada, legumes can give yields equivalent to a grass pasture fertilized with 100 pounds per acre of nitrogen per year. And legumes also provide between 10 and 50% of the grass's nitrogen requirements. When legumes are grazed or clipped, some of the roots die, and the nitrogen fixation nodules release nitrogen into the soil that the grass can use. So animal performance is 5 to 20% higher, and the season of growth is longer with legumes. So general fertility guidelines for hay and pasture: straight grass stands need mostly nitrogen. Legume grass stands and pure legume stands need mostly phosphorus. Soil testing will illustrate the need for potassium and/or sulfur as well if necessary. An additional benefit of properly fertilized alfalfa grass to a forage stand is that it reduces winter kill. In the top left portion of this picture is a check or untreated with no fertilizer, and in the main part of the picture is a high rate of phosphorus. And this is a 7-year-old stand of alfalfa grass in the interlake. So we see we not only have more yield, but we also have a longer lived stand when properly fertilized. That's all I had to say, Lionel. I could try and entertain questions now.
Sorry about that. I'd muted myself there, but okay, Tim, one question would be, if you were limited in the amount of dollars you could spend and you had a alfalfa grass stand, what would be one of the things you would probably look at buying first for fertilizer? Or would you look at a mixed ration, or would you look at just phosphorus? Or
well, phosphorus is the one that it needs. It takes up in large quantities and that our soils are typically deficient on because of our high pH calcareous soils. A lot of older alfalfa stands are deficient in phosphorus, we find. But if it's a gravelly soil or sandy soil, it may need potash as well. So that's why we, the general recommendation is to soil test. But if you can't do that, well, I guess phosphorus is generally the one that we find most often deficient in older alfalfa grass stands.
okay, good. I didn't have any other questions that have come in. So Lori, if you can hand the screen back to me.
Well, Lino, it's John here. I would echo a lot of Tim's comments on the fertility, and for like alfalfa stands, alfalfa predominated, for each ton, they remove between 10 and 15 pounds of phosphate. So if you're not going to soil test, that's a bit of a guideline. For each ton of forage you're going to produce, you're going to have to put back 10 to 15 pounds of P2O5 per ton.
Okay, so P2O5 would be a good starting point if the soil test isn't being done.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. Generally speaking, like a 3 ton per acre alfalfa grass crop, which would be like 4 1,500-pound bales per acre, would remove about 40 pounds of phosphorus. So if you put on 40 pounds, then you should be topping it up unless you had an enormous crop the year before.
Okay, great. Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
I'm going to open this question up to anyone to give a shot at. We're in some dry conditions, and every year we seem to get the same question as we get into seeding, and we haven't received any rain. Do I start to chase moisture for seeding, or do I seed in the dry soil and hope for a rain? So if anybody wants to take a crack at that from their experience of what they've seen over the past years that they've been working, any comments?
Sure, I can give a couple of comments. This is Anne here. In the last couple of weeks, Dane and Dennis and I put together some information on planting depths for dry conditions. So for some crops, you can definitely seed a bit deeper than ideal in order to chase moisture, but for other crops, it's not recommended. And in general, it's good to consider that, when you're seeding deeper, you will likely have less emergence than you'd expect, like say more seedling mortality, and then also some delayed emergence. So you could have a patchier field. So for example, for cereals, like for wheat and oats, the planting depth could range from 1.5 to 3 inches would be as deep as would be recommended. But you don't usually plant deep enough to reach moisture. For barley, it isn't really recommended to go deeper than 2 inches. But with corn, well, say 1.5 to 2 inches is ideal. I would say that people could plant deeper, say 3 inches to reach moisture. But still, there could be delayed emergence because of those cold soils and deeper planting. I'm not sure if Dane and Dennis are on the line to talk about oil seeds and pulses. I don't see their names on the list, so I can just quickly talk about.
Dane was not going to be on the line, but I am, David. And
Okay.
You wanted me to talk about oil seeds and pulses. Dennis could speak to pulses, but we were talking about this morning. The very large seeded crops like field peas can emerge from quite a depth, up to 3 inches. But everything else, if you go deeper to chase moisture, you're setting yourself up for trouble, because the energy that's stored in the seed is depleted before the crop gets out of the ground. Seed treatments help, but they're not an absolute. And I think it's better for seeds to sit in dry soil waiting for moisture than to chase moisture, to go really deep. I guess another thing is, if you are deep and you get the moisture that you need, but all in one heavy shot, you're going to see soil crusting, depending on the texture of the soil. And that also is something that the plant has to deal with as it's trying to push out of the ground. Seed to soil contact is a very important thing, and that's hard to achieve in a dry soil. But again, I think it's better for most crops to sit at the proper depth in dry soil than to seed them deeper than you need in order to get at moisture that's there in the profile. Lionel, I've lost the chat box capability. Is that there for everybody? Because I wanted to throw in a link to a document that we posted recently. It's called Evaluating Seed Treatment Options in a Dry Spring.
Okay, I will, if you could get that to send an email with it to Lori, she'll put it in when she sends out the link. I'm not sure what happened there, but when she sends out the link for everyone for the recorded webinar, we send the link with that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for answering that question, David. I don't think Dennis is on, or is he still on? Or if you had any comments regarding seeding depth. I think we've covered it pretty good anyways. I guess one of the comments I wanted to make about seeding depth is that once we start going deeper, we need to remember that we're starting to disturb more soil, and a lot of times we'll end up going deeper than we were planning. I've been at several guys' places, especially canola always seems to be the big one, where they say they went down to 2 inches, and then when we go looking afterwards, so we're digging up plants from 3 to 4 inches down, and having problems making it out, and seeing the same thing, and sometimes in cereals as well. You know, instead of going down to 2 inches, they're down to 3 and 4 inches. Just make sure you're out there checking, because you're disturbing more soil, you're making more ridges with some of this newer equipment, and when those ridges get blown in, or we get a rain that covers them in, first thing you know, you've got a plant that's got to come through 3 to 4 inches of soil instead of the 2 inches that you were thinking. So just a caution there. Kim sent this to me. It's a fact sheet that just came out. So Kim, if you want to make a few comments regarding this.
Yeah, thanks, Lionel. Sorry, I know we're almost out of time, but I just thought I'd throw this up. And this is just a fact sheet from the Resistant Wild Oat Action Committee, which is composed of people like myself and industry people and Ag Canada scientists across Western Canada, obviously dealing with resistant wild oats, which I know a lot of our province is dealing with. And this is just to talk about a relatively new to us chemistry that we haven't been using a lot of yet, this pyroxasulfone. in. It's in a product like Focus, which can be used pre-seed ahead of wheat. So this is a group 15 chemistry. It has suppression of wild oats. It does not have control, but it has suppression, a good 70% on average, and it will obviously work on our group 1 and our group 2 resistant wild oats. So it's an infographic. There's a scan there on the bottom, a QR code. It's also up on the CWS Canadian Weed Science Society website as well. And I've distributed it to Lionel and his counterparts. So if anybody wants some information or something to talk to your chem reps about, and it's in a number of different compounds. With Focus, it's in there with carfentrazone, which is basically AIM, and it's pre-seed ahead of wheat or up to 3 days after seeding, and it's in a few other products as well for different crops as well. So this is something to think about, another tool in our toolbox to use against resistant wild oats. But again, it needs to be used judiciously. We can't use it too much because there has been a few documented cases of resistance to this chemistry elsewhere as well. So anyways, just some new information for you guys prior to seeding if you want. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Kim. Okay, because of time, I think we'll do these slides next week. I wanted to mention a couple of things. They're still looking for, or they're still taking applications for WADO for the Diversification Center Technician. It's a 1-year term. The email information is there at the bottom of the page. Basically, Scott Chambers is who you need to get a hold of, and that's his contact information. And you can get your application if you're interested, or if you know anybody that's still looking for a summer job, summer students, get them to give them a call. Or it's a great place to learn a lot about agriculture and industry. The field crop protection guides are available, and they're available at the MASC offices, and there's a list of the offices. And if you want, you could phone our toll-free number, and there's a toll-free number there, and they can get you in contact with either one of the offices or one of us, the ag adaptation specialist. And there's our contact information, and we can definitely find a way to get a book to you, or if you're looking for several books, give us a call. And there's the contact information for Lori Forbes, and join us next week, May the 5th, and by that time we'll be into full-time seeding, I would imagine, everywhere. So we'll be seeing some issues come up with some of the cropping issues. So thanks for attending, and see you again next week.